Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. Today I want to talk about a short story that I read because it is Short Story Tuesday, a wonderful day to catalog some of the more interesting short stories that are out there. And today I want to talk about a short story about characters in Harlem. The story is The City of Refuge by Rudolph Fisher, which was published in 1925. For those who don't know, Rudolph Fisher was a Black American author who lived between the late 1800s and the early 1900s. Unfortunately, he died of abdominal cancer pretty young at the age of 37. But in addition to being a writer, he was also a bit of an activist and a doctor. Like he was a pretty big name at the time in his field for X-ray sort of like scientific type of ultraviolet stuff like that. Basically studying viruses and things like that, and that might have had something to do with the medical field and like how he died in of abdominal cancer, kind of related in that way. But when he wasn't doing, doctor stuff or advocating for Pan-Africanism, the idea that like all African Americans you need to unite and work towards a common cause, he was also writing, and his work primarily focused on African Americans in Harlem, focusing on the racial divisions of that and just the Black experience in Harlem as well, which shows up in the story that I'm going to be talking about today. He was one of the authors that I was going to catalog in Black History Month, but that kind of spilled out into other months. So I'm still happy that I was able to talk about this lesser-known Black author who was still a very vital part of the Harlem Renaissance and the Black writers living in New York City at that time. So I've never heard of him, but I'm glad that I found him, and I might be eager to check out more of his work. So without further ado, let's talk about The City of Refuge. I will do a summary, a little bit of analysis, and we will move on from there. So The City of Refuge focuses on King Solomon Gillis. At the start of the story, we learn that he has fled to Harlem after killing a white man. At least in his opinion, it was by accident. The white man had stolen a bunch of horses, and when he confronted him about it, there was a fight that led to his death, and he fled North Carolina in order to avoid being lynched, which was probably the ultimate fate for people who even, maybe sometimes killed others in righteousness, especially if you were Black. But when he gets to Harlem, he runs into Mouse Ugham, who he initially doesn't recognize, but is a person who encouraged him to go to Harlem in the first place. And they have a good interaction there, and he promises to get him some help in Harlem. But we after Gillis leaves, we find out that Mouse believes him to be a ruse or a rube, and him and one of his friends want to exploit Gillis because he's stupid, or they believe him to be stupid, and they can use him and use him as a scapegoat essentially, like when Mouse and Gillis are hanging out at his apartment a short time later, a West Indian man shows up and confronts King Solomon Gillis about accidentally destroying apples or something like that. He ran into a person, they dropped their apples, and now this West Indian man wants to Gillis to pay up for them because some kids ran off with them, and he believes Gillis to be responsible. But Gillis stands his ground, and Mouse helps him, and they decide not to pay for it. And in fact, Mouse Ugham's friends manage to get the West Indian man fired, and Gillis is put into his job, so now he has some work to do in Harlem. A short while after this, Mouse enacts his plan in order to get King to start dealing French pills, which is illegal, but Gillis doesn't know about it. But again, Mouse and his friends are using Gillis as a scapegoat here in order to make some money off this poor non-native to New York City. However, the police and even his boss catch on to this, and so a sting is enacted where they watch as Gillis and Ugham trade pills in public, which is a silly thing to do. And the police confront Gillis about this, and Ugham even sells him out and says, "Oh, I don't know this man. He was just giving me sleeping pills that he says he uses himself. I didn't know they were illegal or anything like that." And as the police try to arrest Gillis, he fights back. But when he turns around, he sees a black police officer, and he's like, they even got colored police officers in Harlem, remarking how he thinks that Harlem is a very advanced place. But it's presumed that because he stopped fighting a little bit and he just smiles at that point, that the police were able to take him down, and that's where the story ends there. In terms of analysis, there is a fair bit to talk about with the city of Refuge. One of the big ideas that Fisher is talking about, the big theme is of course refuge. It's in the name of the story, with Harlem or New York City being proclaimed as a city that black individuals can go to, and it's a safe haven for them from the normal terrors of America, because again, this taking place in the 1920s, America was still segregated. Jim Crow was in place in the South, and things weren't that great, especially for Gillis, because we find out that he killed a man. So allow me to read you a quote that really gets at what Harlem means for Gillis. "That was the point. In Harlem, black was white. You had rights that could not be denied you. You had privileges protected by law, and you had money. Everybody in Harlem had money. It was a land of plenty. Why, had not Mouse Ugham sent back as much as $50 at a time to his people in Waxhaw? The shooting, therefore, simply catalyzed whatever sluggish mental reaction had been already directing King Solomon's fortunes toward Harlem. The land of plenty was more than that now. It was also the city of refuge." And hey, that is the name of the story. For King Solomon, not only is this a place where he can escape the law, but it's also a place where he can probably make a little bit of money, something that he probably couldn't have done in North Carolina because of all the racism, all of the prejudice that existed at that time and still continues to exist in the South. And I would be amiss not to point out the historical background here, how this was not simply, just a single moment for, King Solomon Gillis. He, even though he's a fictional character, this was happening a lot at the time because this was part of the Great Migration of African Americans leaving the South for Chicago, for New York City, for other areas in the North, because they saw opportunity, and the North was slightly less racist than the South. There was still a lot of racism, of course, still race riots, still bad things happening, but there was less of it. And there were a lot of communities in the South where black individuals could go, and immigrants could go and be elevated a little bit, have financial and just general security, where they didn't have to worry about being lynched like Gillis here, or they didn't have to worry about being fired without cause so often. However, despite the fact that this is the city of refuge, exploitation still exists. You still see Mouse Ugham manipulate King Solomon Gillis. There's still a con system that takes place. So even though this is the city of refuge, there's still a sort of class system here. Still a method of people exploiting others and hurting them because they view them as more superior than these people who are just being introduced to the community. And ultimately, Gillis is still taken down by the white system because white police officers show up. And you have a black police officer there too. The black police officer is working for the white system. As you know, in the song Fuck the Police by NWA, they point out that the black officer is part of the white system and is in fact doing more violence as a way to justify their continued employment with this white system. And I'm sure Rudolph Fisher wasn't getting at that, but that's there, the exploitation and the the continued sort of systemic inequality still exists. Even though Gillis was selling drugs, like, he wasn't doing it on purpose. He was being manipulated, but like in the end, it doesn't matter for him. Another thing that Fisher is trying to get at is innocence. He's trying to point out that Gillis is an honest soul in society's measure, that there isn't a place for someone like Gillis because he's a little too naive. And you see this in the beginning of the story when he arrives in the Harlem subway station. It's a very wild and chaotic scene to him. Like, for someone who's grown up in North Carolina, this is a very different and very strange situation, and it makes him like a prime candidate for a con, for some exploitation at the hands of Mouse Uggam and his associates. So Fisher makes it very clear that Gillis is a naive person, and not that Gillis is wrong or anything like that, but more that he can't exist in this system that chews people up and spits them out. Even though Harlem is viewed as a safe haven, like, your innocence is just going to get you hurt and harmed, and same as everyone else. And Gillis is really one of many victims, because we find out that the drugs that Uggam has been dealing have gotten other people killed in the process. So it's not a good time to be Gillis, or it's not really a good time to be one of the lower class Black Americans in Harlem at this time. There is just one thing that I don't like about this story, and I think it's the dialogue. Specifically, Fisher writes it in the dialect of whoever's talking. So King Solomon writes it as a Southern Black man, specifically North Carolina Black man, and then you have a West Indian who's talking as though a Jamaican man would talk. That's specifically what Fisher says there, and then the other characters talk their way. And it can be very distracting and hard to follow what is going on in the story. I know some authors try that, and it's not a big problem, but in general, I think it's very distracting when authors do that, because who is it for? Like, sure, it provides a sense of authenticity, which Fisher might have been writing the way that some of his friends spoke at the time, but it certainly makes it harder for people who aren't enmeshed in those cultures to understand what is being said. Anyway, those are my thoughts on The City of Refuge by Rudolph Fisher, a pretty solid short story, one that I'm going to go and recommend that you go out and read. I'll put a link to it in the description. Let me know what you think in the comments below. I think it's a very interesting or a very interesting sort of remnant of the Harlem Renaissance and the stories like that were being told at the time. Especially because, a lot of people said, Black individuals who go to the North, there's a lot of opportunity for them. But Fisher is seemingly saying here, no, it's very similar to what was going on in the South, but like, people weren't being lynched, but they were being set up to fail in some ways. So definitely check it out and comment below what you think, and let's have a discussion about this. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about this short story or this author if they do not already know. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and Harlem travels. Farewell.